So a few weeks ago, someone left a comment on one of my Instagram posts, and this is what it said. Do you think you will ever get to a point where you no longer count the days being sober, that life will simply be normal and lovely? And by that I mean that your life will not continually be recognizing and celebrating the absence of alcohol. So my first thought when I saw that comment was, wow, this person has really misunderstood the point of my Instagram accounts. I am at the Sober School, by the way, if you want to check me out on Insta. But I don't post on Instagram in order to help myself, find the motivation to stay strong and stay on track. You couldn't pay me enough to drink alcohol again. But I am a coach who helps other people when they want to quit drinking. It's my job to share content about alcohol-free living that inspires people to make this lifestyle upgrade, because that's what it is. Now, perhaps the person who left that comment hadn't realized any of that. It's no big deal. However, when I thought about her comment a bit more and really reflected on the sentiment behind it, it did make me think, actually. In fact, I could really relate to the feeling there. And I started trying to look through my posts and looking at them through the lens of how I felt 10 years ago when I was thinking about quitting drinking, but I didn't really want to. All I knew back then was that people talked about sobriety as if it was really hard work. Got to take things one day at a time. It's that tough. It's going to feel that depriving. It'll take lots of willpower, a lot of energy. All I knew back then was that I didn't want that, and it sounded miserable. Around that time, I went to an AA meeting because back then, everyone would say to you, oh, you must go to AA. It's the only thing that works, which is absolutely not true, by the way, but that's the topic for another day. Anyway, at this AA meeting, there was someone there who was celebrating 20 years of sobriety on that day. Everyone was congratulating him and being really pleased for him. However, I remember feeling quietly appalled that decades on, he was still going to meetings and still working so hard to be sober. And I remember thinking, well, this isn't for me. I don't want to be alcohol-free if it requires going to meetings week in, week out for years. What I wanted was to be able to quit drinking, work on it for a while, and then move on with my life in much the same way that a smoker would do. Because with smoking, yes, it takes effort to quit and change that pattern initially. It's definitely something that requires time and energy and focus to start with. But an ex-smoker doesn't spend the rest of their lives walking around identifying as a recovering nicotineaholic. They don't go to meetings. They're just a non-smoker. They are no longer defined by that thing that they used to do that they no longer do. So, to go back to the question that I was asked on Instagram, is sober life ever going to feel normal and lovely? Actually, I want to say I can really relate to that. Because I post about sobriety all the time, it probably looks as if I'm still working on it consciously or every day or celebrating every sober day in the books, when in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. I am absolutely certain that if I wasn't running the Sober School, if this wasn't my full-time job and dominating so much of my time, then I'd rarely think about alcohol-free living at all. And the reason I'm so certain about that is because I look at what happens to the women who I work with, and I see how alcohol and sobriety just stops being a big part of their lives after a while. It just becomes the norm. I actually quite often get emails from people who want to let me know that they're still doing really well and they've realized that, hey, last week or last month they hit a major milestone, but they missed it because they weren't really counting or focusing on it. So yes, alcohol-free living does feel normal and lovely for me, and it can feel normal and lovely for you and anyone else. In fact, if you're doing it right, it should feel that way. It should feel good. It's a very natural way of living. We weren't designed to ingest a toxin like alcohol. But let me also be real with you here. Alcohol-free living does take some work in the early days. It takes effort and focus to change a pattern of behaviour to begin with. You've got to unpick the social conditioning that we've been told around alcohol and the idea that it is a coping mechanism or it can do certain things for you. Alcohol is a very romanticised drug, and we're conditioned to project qualities onto it that it doesn't have. So, yeah, to begin with, you've got to do that mindset work of examining your thoughts, looking at why you're drinking, and then learning and practicing new ways of taking care of yourself. You do need to be willing to do that mindset work and tolerate the awkwardness of changing a pattern and learning a new way of handling life. I mean, it's just like any big change. If you started an important new job tomorrow, you wouldn't give yourself 3 days to decide whether or not it's the right role for you. You would give yourself 3 months to settle in. And it's kind of the same with sobriety. It does take about 90 days to really get into a rhythm with it, which is why I'm always talking about why you should take a proper break from drinking, not just a couple of days here and there. Now, if you're watching this and you are months into sobriety and you're still finding things really hard, then what you've got to do is look at your thoughts. What beliefs do you have about alcohol? What work are you doing to proactively challenge some of the stories about booze that are swirling around your brain? This is exactly the kind of stuff that I cover on my course. And what I tend to find with people who are sober but miserable is that they have quit drinking using willpower alone. They haven't done any of the thought work. They've gone down the AA route of telling themselves that this is going to be hard, but I've got to do this. I'm going to have to take this one day at a time for the rest of my life. And honestly, I'm here to tell you that it doesn't need to be like that. When you really think about it, there's nothing very normal or lovely about using an addictive poison like ethanol. There's nothing very normal or lovely about using a cancer-causing drug that makes you anxious, stressed out, and full of shame the next day. That's the reality. But we live in a boozy world that loves alcohol, and sometimes it's easy to lose sight of that logic. So I hope this video reassures you that there is an amazing life waiting for you on the other side of that wine glass. Like I always say, sobriety delivers everything alcohol promised. That feeling you look for at the bottom of a bottle, you will find it in sobriety if you just give it a chance.